All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm happy to be here today with my longtime friend, Martijn Schirp. Martijn is a longtime Buddhist practitioner and the founder of Upayosis, where he curates a path between worlds, a year-long contemplative training integrating Buddhist practice, contemplative science, ecological ethics, and optional sacramental psychedelic work. He supports others as a spiritual companion and facilitator, designing structured pathways that cultivate stability, insight, and compassionate action within a caring community container. And Martijn was also one of the co-founders of High Existence, where he and I co-created for a while back in the day, and we co-founded Apotheosis Retreat through High Existence. Martijn was the original visionary of Apotheosis. So, Martijn, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jordan. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today and about topics that I really care about. So thank you so much for creating the space and holding the container. And I'm looking forward to dive deep in, I think, things that we both really care about.
Beautiful. Me too, my friend. So perhaps a good place to start is just a bit about your story, your background, and where that's led you in recent times. You've had a lot of interesting chapters of your life, and I know recently we were just talking before the show about some health challenges that you navigated that
Hmm.
were very initiatory for you. So curious if you could give us a lay of the land of your story and that recent chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do both. Zooming out, I I think before around my high existence early days, I found psychedelics and Buddhism at the same time, and so those paths have been interwoven for me for 15 years now. And I've been pretty dedicated on the meditative path, and I've also feel like I've been going deep, not just personally but also professionally, into the psychedelic field, um, and I feel like this is the path for me. This is the domain that I will stay in for the rest of my life because these practices have given me so much. The Dharma, but also the wisdom of the plants and fungi. And yeah, we were just chatting about recent health struggles I went through, and the it was a very difficult time. I I got really sick. I'm currently I don't know if you can tell, but I'm currently in the jungle in Guatemala and pretty rural, pretty far away from what we considered what we consider most of us consider proper Western healthcare. And I got really ill, and I wasn't quite sure what was causing it. I was having chronic fevers. I was very tired, very weak. And yeah, we're just chatting um, that I was getting really concerned that if it would follow the same trend and it wouldn't be like a floor that um, I don't know how much longer I would have in this world. And and the difficult and beautiful journey that initiation led to, the confrontation with the fact that I'm going to die. And we're all going to die. Like that's a given, right? And um, but I think it's quite common, at least it was for me, that I was living under the delusion that, well, that's something that happens to other people, and my death is going to be far in the future. And as one of my teachers, my main teacher at the moment, has pointed out, he's been a hospice chaplain for a big part of his career, and so he has spent time with over 1,000 people who were in the process of near imminent passing. And and he said it's almost universal for people to believe they had more time. Death always comes unexpected. And in my tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are the set of teachings called um, the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. These are four contemplations that if you contemplate them deeply enough, they kind of sink into the bones, and they they open up a way of looking that basically diminishes the value of things that don't really matter and increases the value that actually things that really matter. And one of the core ones is impermanence. And everything is impermanent. Everything will fall under the second law of thermodynamics. Like entropy will, break down your barriers at one point, and your body will fall apart. And um, we we haven't found any exceptions to that rule anywhere. So knowing that life is impermanent, that we don't know how long we have, and in that moment that became super real for me. And it was a process of first like having to deal with like how can this happen to me? Like why me? Like I've still so many plans. I still want to do so many things. Like I want to travel, I want to love my wife, I want to spend time with my family, I want to hang out with my friends, I want to, you know, build all these I have so many things I want to build. Like this is not happening to me. And um like being in the process of okay, like I can barely get out of bed today. Like I need to spend all my time, all my focus, all my energy on trying to get better. There was no room for any of the things that I normally do in daily life. Like even that things as basic as doing grocery run, like I couldn't do it. And so the pressure that put on my wife to, work but also take care of us, like oh shit, this is like how we're gonna do this if this is gonna be permanent. Like if I'm not getting better. So that was a big part of it. The anger, like around being like feeling a victim, like why me? That was the process that was very difficult. Um, and yeah, like the idea of not seeing your family again, not seeing your loved ones again, and um, that was painful. That was very, very tough to sit with because for me, having meditation practice for the last 15 years, it's so you're so vulnerable, you're so open, and you're so sensitive to all the little tendencies to want to pretend it's not happening or distract oneself from that, from it's not happening. And that's not inherently bad. Like I think the drive to regulate your suffering is very it's very human, it's very compassionate, but a lot of these drives they don't really work. They might give temporary relief, but it doesn't really change the fact that life is impermanent, and um, we only have one life, and when it ends, it ends. As in this form, in this body, in this moment. And so it really this is why it's such an important reflection, and why often people who have gone through a near-death experience or like a um, big death scare, like there's a um, in therapeutic literature they call it a conversion moment. It's the same, like it's almost the same as like a spiritual conversion or a religious conversion, where it's like the sudden realization, like, oh shit, the way I've been living has not been the way I want to live, the way I feel like is the way to honor this precious limited time that I have. and um, so very painful and very beautiful, very meaningful. Uh, and we were just chatting about how um, I sometimes wonder if I didn't have my practice and I didn't have the experiences that I had with under psychedelics, for example, of feeling like, okay, this is my death. I I would assume that um, I wouldn't have been able to see this process as a teacher, as an opportunity to honor life more, to love deeper, to um, become gentler and more caring, and instead probably have tightened around like more distraction, more anger, more victimhood, more um, because it's such a ready at hand way of relating to it, and it's much more difficult, I find, but much more valuable and skillful to be able to see a deficit teacher, to be able to see all those emotions as as energies that reveal something that's really important. And the only way to really understand and begin to receive that level of insight is to treat it with care and respect, and you do that by sitting with it and really feeling it and not hiding, not running away. And it's easy to say, but I found it pretty hard to do in the moments when I was physically very unwell, in a lot of pain, and like just tired of feeling those emotions and tired of like just wanting it to end in a way. It's like, man, this is no life. I don't want to like I can see why some people feel at one point like I can't tolerate this anymore. Like I wasn't there yet at all, but I when I was projecting, like if I would feel like this for another year, another 2 years, I don't know. Then it would really depend on my capacity to see it as a teacher, see it as a process that is still incredibly valuable and precious. Um, because in the moments when I couldn't do that and I collapsed and I was like, I just want to give up. Those are the moments like, wow, I can see the decision. Also, I think born out of kindness and compassion, but the decision that like, okay, there's no there's no purpose of continuing this. So, anyways, I'm very glad to share uh, that I was able to pause my life and focus on my health, and I'm very grateful for all the researchers and the research that's been done over the last 5 years around this condition that I have to figure out like um, some of the treatment models that could work, and they seem to have worked, and I'm doing much better now. So,
That's great to hear, my friend. Yeah, thanks for sharing vulnerably that whole story. It's just a really powerful story.
hmm
And I'm curious if you were gonna look at what was the purpose of that initiation for you. You spoke to this somewhat, but just contemplating what burned away through that process, what burned away or fell away through that process.
hmm Yeah, great question. I think the obvious one is this kind of naivete that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me. And I think there's a level of, it's this, it's hard. I don't know if I have the right words for it, but it's the sense of like life being incredibly fragile and vulnerable, and at the same time being incredibly beautiful and worth protecting. And I feel like I've always had that inclination, but now I feel like, okay, my days are numbered, and that's very obvious. And it doesn't mean that I have to squeeze everything out of it in every second, because I don't think I can will that. I think going through that, it dropped away all of the things that, um, like we talked a little bit before recording, and in Buddhism, there's a lot to be said about, the path is easy for those who are able to drop all preferences. And I think there's a range of preferences that I just can't be bothered about anymore. And and that's so much. I wouldn't say it's like a black and white thing, but it's a question of degree. But the level of letting go around, like having to feel good in my body, for example, like having to, I don't know, get all the things that I wanted, the times that I wanted, like that doesn't play that big of a role in comparison. And of course, that's a function of the practice that I've been doing, and not just the process of yeah, the mortality being mortality initiation. But it definitely sped things up. Um, I think fundamentally, the fragility of life, that it's impermanent, and it made me think a lot about, like, what do I want to leave behind? Like, what am I contributing to the world? What am I putting in? And is that something that is worth continuing? And if it's not, I kind of lost interest. Not because it's bad or anything. I just, it's not a rule-based, like, inside, now I have to change my life, and not gonna do that anymore. It just dropped away. Um and it mirrors kind of the path of Buddhism, I think, in general, but I think a lot of wisdom paths and contemplative paths, um, where the the fundamental ignorance around who we are kind of drops away, and what remains after all kind of distortions, it's this deeper understanding of who we fundamentally are, and it's not the small self, it's not the the stories we make about ourselves. It's not even the particulars of our body. It's we've come out of this mystery, and we are this mystery, and we'll always be this mystery. And trusting that, I think, um, is kind of the only way, like the thing that finally that helped me get through the most dark times. And it's this confidence that I think will stick with me through my life, but also in the process of my eventual passing.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful reflections, my friend. Thanks for sharing with us. And yeah, I feel like this is a good moment to launch a little deeper into Buddhism and
Hmm.
contemplative practice, something we're both really fascinated by and interested in and deeply engaged in. And um, yeah, just again, really honoring the share. Those are really deep, deep share. And on the topic of impermanence, it reminded me of this quote that I believe is from the Dzogchen tradition, where they say all phenomena self-liberate upon arising. And
Mm-hmm.
one a teacher of mine would speak about that as a simultaneous appearing and vanishing of all phenomena, that this
Hmm.
moment is completely fresh. You've never seen this moment before. If you look closely at the infinity of detail that's here and this pixelated vibratory field of embodied aliveness and just full field aliveness, it's new in every moment. It's never You've never experienced it in that way. Every time I see my daughter, I've never seen her
Hmm.
that way before. Every time I see my wife, I've
Hmm.
never seen her that way before. And so there's this freshness, and
Hmm.
we're usually numb to that because we kind of put everything in these conceptual boxes and we don't
Hmm.
realize that we're seeing the world through the lens of these concepts. But if we can kind of cut through that to the naked experience, it is total impermanence in a sense where this moment is born and dies instantaneously in a sense. It's almost like we continuously are born and die, or the phoenix
Hmm.
resurrects from the ashes every moment, or the universal Christ resurrects from the ashes in every moment, kind of thing. I'm
Right.
curious, yeah, I'm
Hmm.
curious what that brings up for you.
Yeah. Um, to me, it speaks to our fundamental awakened nature that's always already present and has been from the very beginning. And in the great perfection or the great connection tradition, it's seen that our fundamental nature is uh, already always completely pure, and it's been from the very beginning. It's just our conceptual overlay that fabricates things between liking and disliking, and then we're always kind of caught. Oh, I don't want that. I want to get that, and we're always like running around trying to get that little bit of comfort. But it's impossible to get there. Even if you have comfort, you have the fear of losing the comfort. And so, in an impermanent universe that's always already falling apart, there is no kind of resting place. And so, if you're able to drop that, if you're able to drop this constant need for evaluation, there's a recognition that can happen that all phenomena are already self-liberated. And this is why the Dzogchen is seen as the pinnacle of the Buddhist path, because it basically takes the fruit of the path as the path. And um and you need, it's like it took me like 12 years kind of to understand. Like I was always interested in it, but I never got it until I did all the preliminary practices and realized, oh, my tendencies to fabricate and evaluate is something that's conditioned and it's not inherently to reality. And if I drop that skillfully, I recognize the nature of mind, if you will. And then you can see um, phenomena as they really are, so to speak. And that means they're already liberated in their own nature. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to. You don't even have to recognize your fundamental nature. It's already that's the nature of phenomena, that they are liberated, and that kind of absolves you from. It's actually incredibly, like, the deeper I go in my practice, the more I'm amazed at the profundity of that teaching, because it there's a part of like self-liberate even the antidote. So in practice there's sometimes a tendency, now I need to see everything as self-liberated, and then I get an insight, or I need to get somewhere to understand it. And all of those things are kind of self-liberated in their own place, because all of those things still are dependent on some goal-oriented model or some self as agency. I posit myself here and this outcome there. And if I do that, then I will recognize that things are liberated. And that implies my current moment with my suffering, with my smallness, my pettiness, my difficult emotions, my resistances. That's not it. But that means you're actually not recognizing it clearly. And and then you start looking at all the things that normally you don't want to look at, and you let that come up and go and self-liberate, and you realize, oh wow, none of that left a stain. None of that is inherently there. And then you start looking, what is fundamentally there? And the more you look, the deeper you look, with this level of stability that often is the preliminary, this clarity and stability of mind. You won't find anything that's inherently existing which is the fundamental truth in Buddhism, emptiness, everything is codependently arising. And without those dependencies, things don't arise. And then the question is, okay, what is left? And that's the empty space of awareness, the epistemic space, which is not a nothingness, but it's a luminosity. And it's a luminosity that's at the same time responsive. It has no qualities, but it's knowing, it's responsive, and it's caring. And that's all you've ever been, always, forever. And it's not a thing, it's not an object, but it's basically the ontological fundamental space of being. And and I think you can label it with many, many words, and many traditions do have had those experiences or paths to recognize that experience, um, without necessarily falling into this perennialism that they're all the same. But I think there's the beauty to be able to recognize that in every moment, in every context. And the effect of that is something that I find incredibly beautiful, which is all of these same things that we just talked about, all these particularities, these preferences, these little um, things that seem so real, but then sometimes weeks after, like if you got in a fight with someone, for example, or you got upset about something, and then a week later, you're like, what was I thinking? Like that didn't matter at all. Like that didn't, it was completely concocted with my own mind. Like all of those things kind of drop away, and what remains is this sense of deep, infinite peace, and presence, and tapping into that and recognizing that's available to us in every moment, no matter. It's like the layer of awareness before evaluation, before preference, that is incredibly wise. It's ancient. It's available to us in any moment, in sickness, in the process of dying, in grief, in dreaming, in dreamless sleep, and on the psychedelic doesn't matter. In darkness retreat, in tantric rituals, and and that's such a gift to be able to recognize that. It's such a gift, because a lot of things that at least for me, that I used to get really upset about or caused a lot of suffering, that like it's the realization that, oh, those are just my own projections, and I can stop participating in 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 this contraction of awareness. And if I can remain open and spacious, then everything kind of unfolds by itself. It reminds me of this quote, like nature does not hurry, but everything gets accomplished. It's like that's true for us as well, and it's been true for forever. And and you can see that's true by paying close attention and embarking on the inquiry and the contemplative path, whether it's psychedelics or Buddhism or Christianity or Sufism or Vedanta or the Ayahuasca path or the Curandero path, like they all have that potential to recognize um, the I think the inner divinity that's present in every single being. And and for me, that's the most beautiful way of looking that I found, and it's the most precious. Um, yeah, the most. I know it has a lot of eros, it has a lot of vitality, and it has like this. I know like this natural source of poetics, of recognition, of celebration, of joy, of generosity, and all the things that makes the world beautiful and humanity beautiful. Um and yeah, for me, the first time I tasted that, I was like, oh my God, what's that? I want more of that. And then you realize like the more you want it, the farther you get away, and then you realize, oh wow, it's actually not just a peak experience. It's present everywhere. It's not dependent on anything. But if you think it's dependent on anything, you're fabricating something that's not that. And so then you get into the realm of paradox and contradictions. But um, yeah, I found it to be um, very nurturing and very healing, and also I think the ground for what true ethical action is. And we can go deeper into that, but you know, going through different cultures and seeing where the world is heading and the suffering that a lot of people are going through and the what's called cognitive fusion with identity. Like people really think the narratives they have and the preferences they have and the judgments they make about other people is inherently that way. People are inherently evil or inherently um, and I don't think there's any proof for that. But if you believe that's the case, it justifies a lot of violence and aggression and extractivism and that type of thing. Um, and it's so painful if you realize you don't need anything. You don't need anything external to validate you. You don't, you know, as long as you have the basics around, some food, some shelter, some belonging, you're pretty good. You can pretty good. It's a pretty good life that way. And then you see people fabricating these really crazy lifestyles to be able to just feel a little bit of comfort, and it's then it becomes quite obvious to me, at least, that the diagnosis of fundamental delusion and projection and cognitive fusion and um, reification that's the root of a lot of suffering and confusion. And so for me, the path of Buddhism and the path of psychedelics um, have been the main sources of wisdom that allowed what I feel like is a level of sanity and a level of contentment that I don't know I would have gotten otherwise. And I've been very like I know you know my background, but there was a period where I was very confused and very driven by uh, first material things, and then later, immaterial like things like status and power and insight. I want to be smart and all those things are, in a way, looking back, they were important stepping stones for me to realize, oh, that's not that. Exhausting kind of the projection. But now looking back, it was like it's kind of hilarious how much I've been turning around my wheels and not going anywhere. Sorry, long story, but
No, no, great reflections. Loving it. You mentioned the ontology piece, which I'm curious about. You mentioned the word ontology. I know that
hmm
some practitioners, some of contemplative traditions or contemplative practices, um, make the leap into kind of creating an ontology or creating a metaphysics out of the insights that come through these types of practices. Like
hmm
sometimes seeming to, go as far as kind of taking the view and trying to concretize it into a philosophy or say this is how things, are in a fundamental sense,
hmm
whereas other practitioners kind of advocate for or at least mention that you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't have to make the leap of this is how things are based on the practice. You can just engage in the practice and the observation of now and notice that now is all there is. You can't find the past, you can't find the future. You're on this razor's edge of vanishingness, appearingness.
hmm
Everything's vivid, everything's bright, everything's flavorful. Your definitions cannot pin anything down, and even just going into that type of inquiry reveals this, as you say, lightness and freshness and vividness.
hmm
and and heart-opening compassion, and you can savor those fruits in a way without needing to kind of make the leap of, and therefore this is the ultimate nature of everything. I'm curious where you land on that spectrum.
Yeah. What a beautiful question. Thank you. There's so much nuance that I feel, but also is found in different traditions. Um, I think there like anything, there's value and there's danger. And the value is that it can function as a skillful means. It can function as classically seen as a raft, where um, for you to go from misunderstanding to understanding, you might need an in-between way of looking that if you practice, something is revealed. And then once you get on the other side, you're not carrying the raft with you on your back. And in the practice of Dzogchen, the view is incredibly important. And at the same time, it's meant to be left behind. It's not something you wanna, oh, I'm gonna, this happens quite often and it's very understandable. Like, okay, I'm gonna really study Dzogchen and I'm gonna read all the books and then I'm gonna conform into this identity of being a Dzogchenpa and trying to fit in and being really good. Like that's not gonna help you whatsoever to realize the nature of your mind. Um, at the same time, studying is important to undo misunderstanding. But it's like this Ouroboros at a fundamental level, it kind of eats its own tail. Like all language constructs are an incredibly crude tool to actually capture something. Like you can't capture anything. And so the delusion that's inherent in often in language of like, now I got it. Now I know because I labeled it correctly. That's ridiculous. Like life is not lived in this competition of who can label phenomena the most accurately. Um, and at the same time, like language is the fundamental co-fabrication condition of reality. Like it reveals things, it highlights things, and it diminishes other things. And so we live within language. We can't do without. And it's another illusion to think, I'm going to be a perfect, pure Dzogchen practitioner, and I'm never going to speak a word again. Well, that would be delusional too. And so it's it's recognizing it's recognizing the skillfulness and the value of language without being captured by it. And a big part of the practice of structure, which is, let's say, the fundamental practice of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which the literal translation is cutting to hardness, which over time allows the tendency for us to solidify things. Like we think reality is very solid, and unless we're dreaming, then it's very obvious we're not, things are not solid. But once we're awake, we're like, okay, this is real, this is really there, independent of my own projections. It has a self nature. Um, that is actually a way we've been conditioned to be functional in reality. It's not inherently, and you can see that not just in Buddhism. You can see that in developmental psychology, for example, where um, you know over time, children clearly learn how to have these fundamental categories around time, causality, object permanence that, they didn't have as a baby. And then over time they develop that, and that becomes like these hyper priors, these Kantian ways of looking. But we can dissolve that and melt that, and something else arises. And you can't really capture that with language. You can't really pin that and it's like, I got it. But you can um, released into that and realized that that's already always been present, and that's the original purity, and that's the ontological basis of Buddha nature, or um, what's called emptiness, emptiness luminosity. And from that view, which is kind of the view of no view, things always already self-liberate, and there's nothing you have to do. And that's actually like a specific understanding why it's called self-liberation. Because like the way I approached it when I first heard that teaching, it was I gotta like my mind gotta self-liberate. Awareness needs to self-liberate, but that's not the case. Like phenomena in itself are self-liberated, as in you don't have to do anything. And the moment you can try how hard it is not to do anything. I know if I'm sure you've tried to practice that, and then you realize everything is already happening by itself. And that's a big, I know that threw me for a loop for a while, because we're so invested in seeing, like, thoughts arise spontaneously and they liberate spontaneously. And with that, often an identification arises also, of like, that's me, I'm thinking. But if that arises automatically, spontaneously, then what is aware of that? And trying to capture that with language is just another fabrication, another arising, and it's like on writing on water. It's like, doesn't mean it's not skillful, but it's not fundamentally, independently true, absolutely true. And so it's a relative truth that speaks to the absolute, but it can never quite box it in and own it and capture it, and all these things that we feel like, all these tendencies that we feel like to prop ourselves up as someone, someone who doesn't have to suffer and who is not subject to permanence and death and decay. And I think that's a tendency that you can become very, very comfortable with over time, because that's the tendency where we forget our own spaciousness, our own ease, and we get contracted and fixated. And and that's the practice. Can we release all the fixations? And one of the fundamental one is like trying to get it, trying to understand it fundamentally, absolutely, independent of any context. And that's, I think, relatively possible, but absolutely not.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I would say for me, the at this point, like the need to try to pin it down in a belief system or a philosophy or a metaphysics or an ontology, like drops away more and more. And I can just look at
Hmm.
what I experience now, for example, as well as just some of my most profound experiences. And I can say, well, if I look at this now, this seems miraculous that this is here at all. And it
Hmm.
seems like a miraculous shining forth of pure light, pure texture, pure energy from infinity, from nowhere, which is
Hmm.
everywhere present, from, everywhere and nowhere from infinity. And I've had experiences of just where I completely evaporated and dissolved into that, and it was just, the only words completely disappear, but you come out and you feel like, oh, well, that was God, that was infinity, that was pure light, that was the diamond heart of Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
It's just like a dissolution into pure grace. And so that kind of left me with this deep sense of like, well, that feels to me like the heart of reality, and this is and it's ever present, and it's always shining forth as this moment now, as it is. And we're just usually kind of veiled in a way from really feeling and experiencing that because of all of our concretizations is kind of a word I
Hmm.
like, similar to what you're
Hmm.
using, fabrication, like the way
Hmm.
we've concretized and solidified all these ideas
Exactly.
and definitions. locks us into a certain narrow view, a reducing valve in a way, and
Hmm.
we don't feel the infinity. And the more you let yourself feel the infinity, I mean, yeah, the mind is still kind of tempted to pin it down and be like, yes, I know for sure, what that is, and I can create a philosophical system about it, and that's the ground of being, and I'm going to call it God. And but at the end of the day, I don't know what that is. I don't know what any of this is, and I know just the only thing that's undeniable and unavoidable is that this is here. This is, whatever you want to call it, isness
Hmm.
is, being is, and that's the only thing I can find that's like undeniable um, about my experience is just that it is. And but the nice thing is, yeah, like I say, I just have less and less of a need to put it in the box of belief systems, and
Hmm.
then that allows for just embracing the full spectrum of all the different kind of emanation modes and dimensions and emanations that it seems to drift through as it just is continually drifting through these different flavors and
Hmm.
textures.
Yeah, beautifully said.
And yet it has left me, one final note on that is just it has left me with this irrevocable, profound sense of sacredness that like this is
Hmm.
incredibly sacred. This is miraculous beyond all comprehension. What this fundamentally is completely like beyond what I ever imagined it could be. It just feels, utterly astonishing. So that's a good
Beautiful.
feeling to be left with, I guess.
Yeah, I'm happy for you. That's such a gift to be able to concrete concretize. Sorry, pronunciation. Not practiced that one yet. To be able to do that, but also to be able to let that go, to be free of the need of it, but to have the skill to, because you got, if you live life, you need to fabricate things. You need to make things concrete. Like you need to figure out shelter and food, and like you want the best for your daughter and make sure she has the love and care and the support and the education that makes her resilient and lives a meaningful life and a loving life. And that's beautiful. So sometimes in these circles, there's sometimes this tendency to be like the absolute archetypal hermit. Like I want to move away from everything, any fabrication. I want to live a completely unfabricated life, and that's another form of, I think, of delusion. It's about seeing through, and then you can become seeing through the process, and then you can become skillful around it. And then you can write poetry without having to believe that's the fundamental say about reality, and I have to conform to that view, otherwise something happens. And And I think that's the real freedom. Can you be free, can you be free to skillfully fabricate, and can you also be free from the necessity to always fabricate in certain ways? And and the more I feel like the deeper I go on this path and the better I understand it and the deeper my practice goes, the the more those two spectrums come together. And then becomes a question for me at least. Okay, once we've realized the emptiness luminosity, the Kata Barba, the womb of existence, the that's always pregnant with this like what Meister Eckhart called like the overflow of the Godhead. That's and the beautiful um constant birthing of this miraculous existence, this high existence. Uh what to do with that, how to live our life knowing that. And if I listen to my teachers, and also if I really take the lessons that in the process of my illness, if I take those lessons to heart, it's if the fundamental reality is caring, and even though the suffering is in a way fabricated, it's not less real. And what do we do about that? If our fundamental reality is one of caring, then what's the skillfulness in that? Like, how do we really care for one another? Like, how would I care for my body, for the people around me? And then it becomes like a beautiful practice of this refinement and discernment around, okay, where's the work that I need to do to um, to own up to my own projections and not leave a legacy behind of misinformation or distrust or extraction, and how do I tend to those in need with a level of gentleness and care? How do I promote that which is beautiful, and 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 realizing like there's infinite amount of conditions that come together to allow my existence, and therefore I'm also a factor in this network of agency that co-fabricates the whole universe. And so there's a tremendous amount of responsibility in that role. And um, so that's I think a question I have, like what does that mean in our particularities of our time in this age and day and age, with this ecological destruction, with this political polarization, um, because it's so easy to get dragged along with that. And at the same time, I think there's a beauty and a potency to live that as live life as a recognition of that inner light, of the Buddha diamond heart, as you beautifully said. And that's not this grandiose kind of identity to take on and like, this superior, I have this insight and you don't kind of thing, but more like, can I go into the mud with the suffering, and can I actually be of service and be helpful out of solidarity with the suffering that's always over, always present for those who don't recognize that. And that's been a big awakening for me personally, to kind of not just recognize that, but also to be more comfortable stepping into that, acknowledging that that's how I want to live my life. And still very early in that process. So I'm sure we can have a conversation in 4 or 5 years from now where we look back and have some fun at this conversation. But um, that's a question that's really top of mind. So I'm curious how you're holding that, because I know you're supporting a lot of people, um, in their process and their lives, and you've grown quite a bit in the sense of, taking on that responsibility. And I assume there's a level of recognition that type of relationship is sacred. So I'm curious how that unfolds for you, and how does that all of that, like that grandness, how that titrates into actually
Hmm.
concrete level of having to live your life, having to wake up in the morning, and having to
Hmm.
support people with some real, they're real things of loss and grief and struggle and that type of thing.
Yeah, great question. Um, I feel like Jesus Christ put it really succinctly when he said, "What you do to the least among you, this you also do to me." Or
Mm,
so
hmm
do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I
I
feel
love
like
that way.
these, yeah, I feel like these insights or these explorations lead to an increasing dissolution of being a separate entity, and there's more of a sense that we are all the ocean, and all the waves fundamentally are the
Mhm.
ocean. And there's such a deep sense of interconnection and a real feeling that, like, what I do to another person, I'm doing to myself. And like you say, you know, I won't claim to be, a master on this path you know, of skillfulness. It's like literally there's
Hmm.
room for endless subtlety
Hmm.
and endless refinement. And every stone you turn over and find another layer of shadows or blind spots or subtle
Right.
layers of non-integrity. And then you try to repair those
Hmm.
and uproot that or alchemize that. And then you find the next layer of subtle ways that you might be. And it becomes stuff that other people might not even see. It's a very deep inquiry
Hmm.
into what does integrity and skillfulness mean. But that I would
Hmm.
say is my North Star that I orient toward is Christ's statements essentially encapsulate that North Star. Like what I do
Hmm.
to anyone, this I'm doing to my very own self. And therefore I really see it as insanity that mankind is murdering each other en masse still, that we murdered 100
Hmm.
million of our own brothers and sisters in the 20th century alone, that we continue to murder billions of non-human life forms every year just for our own gastratory
Yeah.
gastronomic pleasure basically. And again, I'm not trying to shame anyone with that. I was raised a meat eater and I've eaten meat my whole life and at different times tried to drop it and been, it's declined over the years. And then recently I seem to be possibly, at least for now, making a transition to vegetarianism, and that feels good, feels aligned because I don't want to kill those animals, and if the animal is sitting right in front of me, I wouldn't want to kill it. So why am I participating in that if I don't need to eat
Hmm.
it? If I could eat, rice and curry and lentils and potatoes instead. Generally get the sense that the plants are more neutral about their own demise. They're much more ancient and plants
Hmm.
in many ways seem wiser than us. I mean, the trees don't kill each other. They just abide as pure presence.
Not all
Man,
trees, but
yeah,
there
okay,
are
maybe
exceptions.
maybe some trees do kill things, but anywho, yeah, what it comes back to for me is like I hold a radical vision, I would say, of ending war, not only on Earth, but in all worlds. Like I pray for
Hmm.
all beings to realize non-separation and wake up from this insanity of
Hmm.
creating a world of war that our children have to then be born into and live with, a world of violence and abuse and kidnapping and, enslavement and human trafficking. I would prefer for all these things to fall away. And similar to you, I do feel like the awakening journey is the only thing that really goes to the root of that, because it feels like the
Hmm.
root is
Right.
this feeling of separation, that I'm over
Hmm.
here and you're over there and you're fundamentally different from me. Whereas as that dissolves more and more and you see all beings as God's children, or children of the
Hmm.
one light, however you want to put it, um, that sense falls away more and more, and it just feels really obvious, like, oh, it's not even hard, everybody, come on, we could just stop killing each other and live in peace,
Hmm.
and we could explore the joyful, creative, beautiful possibilities of life without all this nonsense. So that's kind of how I look at it, on more of like a few different angles. And in my day-to-day life, it shows up as just endlessly practicing to be more present with my daughter, to just put the devices away and truly be present with her and just give her pure loving presence, which I feel is the best gift we can give to anybody, is just our true
Hmm.
loving presence. And sometimes I just look in her eyes and start crying and tell her, I love you so much, and just let her know how precious she is and let her know she's beautiful and I love her, and letting her mother know that she's beautiful and I love her,
Amen.
hugging her every day, and the people I hold space for, just as much as possible. I mean, I try to do this all the time, but especially when holding space, I really try to surrender all kind of personal aspects and not in the sense that there's still a personal human heart quality for sure, a deep like
Mhm.
human relatability, but I try to completely get myself out of the way in a sense and be unconditional love as deeply as I'm able to for the person in front of me and just pure witnessing with no agenda. I try to remove any agenda that I might have and just be a space of pure witnessing for the people, the person in front of me, as I've
That's a
discovered that to be a really deep medicine,
Mhm.
just people having a space where they can really feel safe to share anything, full spectrum of life, and it can be witnessed and held in love and grace and there's a lot of other aspects to it too, but that's probably the most fundamental aspect of my space holding is to be a space of unconditional love, unconditional
Mhm.
witnessing. Yeah.
Be the space. Yeah. 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 It's beautiful. It's like the agenda of no agenda. It's
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, it has so much resonance with the Bodhisattva path, and according to Buddhists, like Jesus was one of the greatest Bodhisattvas ever. They don't necessarily buy into the metaphysical, like the the Son of God, or they don't make a fundamental distinction between the everybody's a divine reincarnation in some ways, um, and that leads to the preciousness of treating every being is a Buddha, and and that's like before the Dzogchen, there's like the tantric path, and big part of the tantric path is developing almost everything you just said is this capacity for pure vision, where instead of our our tendencies to think things are ordinary. Well, if things are not inherently this way or that way, we can develop the skillfulness of seeing things in a sacred way. And, whatever lens is appropriate, and that could be, treat um, the least amongst us as if they're the body of Christ. And that's incredibly skillful. And um, like the reality, I think, will look very, very different if you choose to look at it that way and you actually understand the profundity of that. It's not just a decision, right? It's not just a label you put on. It's like everything suddenly comes into focus in that way as like a fundamental factor or anchor. And um, I think the best facilitators they go through that process of embodying and integrating that because the more you feel like that's the North Star, it will put in juxtaposition like all the moments when it's like I I wasn't fully in integrity here. Like there was like a need that I wasn't fully aware of that I tried to fill or to fulfill, and and potentially that caused harm, and it doesn't make you less of a human being or doesn't make you a bad person, but it does invite you to wait a minute. I can learn something here, and um, I don't want to fulfill my needs in this way because this other person is actually more important than my own needs in this moment. Not that your needs are unimportant, not that you need to negate yourself as a martyr or anything, because I think sometimes that happens as well in these spaces. But how can you be empowered and self-empowered and support the other person being empowered and self-empowered too without necessarily having to take something from them or make them less or make yourself less, you know. And I think that's really gorgeous. So I'm very inspired to hear you're holding it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, brother. And yeah, interestingly, this comes up. I feel you might find it interesting. A friend who has gone deep into Buddhism, I believe, and contemplative traditions told me that one of his teachers told him at some point, if you're doing healing work, it's very valuable to have a sense of a lineage holder that essentially if you try to take all this karma onto yourself in some way, or it's easy for facilitators or healers or space holders to take on the baggage of the people they're working with, and that if you try to take that on yourself, it can easily be a recipe for burnout or physical illness, or it just weighing you down. And so having some sense of a lineage holder who you can
Hmm.
offer everything up to, in a sense, like affirm, this is not mine to hang on to. I give it all to Christ. In my
Hmm.
case, is like Christ
Hmm.
feels like my lineage holder. I've had very unexpected kind of full circle, just return to my ancestral roots in some sense, although I hold it very differently from most people. I mean, I've had just some of the most profound mystical experiences of my life, both with psychedelics, but also sober, just having visions of Christ, listening to Christ-focused music, visions of
Hmm.
him and his light coming to my heart, and just like weeping and weeping and just feeling this sense of pure love and pure truth and pure grace flowing through when that's happening. And so it's been very valuable to me to also have that sense of a like a transcendent lineage holder or face of
Hmm.
divinity, you could say, that everything can be offered up to. I often visualize like a skylight up above, or I also use the earth and will visualize like a portal to the earth below, and just like
Hmm.
offer everything to these kind of divine beings that can help to digest and metabolize all of this
Hmm.
stuff. So I find that helpful. And but yeah, I recently wrote an essay that I'll publish soon about, the current title is The Transpin Downable Christ. And it's essentially all about how Christ himself is beyond what can be pinned down. And that,
Hmm.
a lot of people, if they had visions of Christ, they would probably jump to, well, this must mean, the Bible
Right.
is completely true and Jesus is the
Hmm.
one savior and this is the only way. And, and yeah, I don't hold it that way myself. I see the mystery of that presence.
Hmm.
I've experienced other saints and yogis and sages and stuff from different traditions in
Hmm.
similar ways too. So that's kind of helped me to realize, okay, this isn't specific to one tradition. Whatever
Right.
this beingness is, this vastness, it has a peculiar quality of being able to emanate forth to
Hmm.
us in a living language that we can relate to or that
Right.
we can understand. And so, yeah, I just hold that as a mystery and can see the infinity, the non-pin down ability, the
Hmm.
unfindability of it. And at the same time, it's that doesn't make it less profound. It makes it more profound because then it's like it has all the divine, love and grace, and you see like, wow, it just opens into pure infinity. Like I kind of similarly with my daughter, it's like when I started to deeply experience and discover like what she's like when I don't pin her down at all, when I kind of in a way almost like forget her name or forget what she supposedly is, and I just
Hmm.
let her be just the sparkling radiance, or as you say, the sparkling luminosity. And she's still there. I wanted to touch on the word fabricated at some point, because I feel like this word sticks a little bit for me because it makes it sound like things are fake or artificial the way that I
Hmm.
hear it. But yeah, to me, it's like if I drop all concretization, she's still fully there, but she's revealed as the ocean
Hmm.
itself, emanating forth as the pure luminous mystery of, what I call my daughter Leela. And I don't know what she is. And I don't own her in any sense. But she's then this like this free emanation, and she is
Hmm.
there as the ocean, presenting
Right.
as that face of divinity. So that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, beautifully put. Um, so in my language, what would fall away then is a fabrication of her just as this, like from a material view, it's like, oh, uh, just a body, just this form. And that's a fabrication. And and you could say the ocean is a much more refined fabrication, but even that can fall away, and then it's maybe just this Christ reality, and it's maybe even more refined form of fabrication. Like if all fabrication falls away, perception falls away. That's kind of the technical view in Buddhism, where perception is fabricated dependent on craving or clinging, and if that falls away, levels um, levels of fabrication fall away, including like sense of having a body, sense of time, sense of space itself, and all the way down to the unfabricated. And that's kind of the ocean. That's kind of one taste of everything. Um, and and so for me, the fabrication, like I'm so kind of indoctrinated in the tradition that it doesn't feel fake. Like there's a it comes actually from the Western tradition. There's a distinction between things that are fabricated poorly and things that are built well. And and I think wisdom traditions, they are they're very coherent with reality. They explain reality. They try to be incredibly truthful. If they're authentic and they lead to actual beautiful fruit, and you shall recognize them by how they are. And so that's kind of the litmus test for me, that if something is really embodied and the way they see it, it has a level of integrity, of truthfulness. um, and and those are beautiful fabrications. Those are the pinnacle of uh, human resonance with the mystery. And then there are things that are fabricated very, very poorly. And then I share that, that connotation of, um, you know, this is not worth our time. Kind of, it's like meant to deceive or meant to extract or meant to. Um, that's the difference for me. Anyways, I wanted to circle back that the what your friend told about the tradition and being able to have a lineage holder. Traditionally, um, like in Buddhism, you take refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, and re taking refuge is such a profound concept, that it took me also more than a decade to even scratch the surface of that. And lineage it does many things. It's the living transmission, because without any lineage, you would not have been able to recognize that. You had to do all the work on your own, which, I probably wouldn't have been able to do if I never saw an example. Like I would probably be very confused and do something else. So that's a function. Um, but it's also this living energy that, on one hand, allows you to recognize that it exists, like to have a vision of Christ. It's like then you suddenly experience, oh, there's a possibility that this is true. And in Buddhism, it basically goes through steps where you um, you have something called guru yoga, which is a practice where you visualize your lineage holder or your actual guru that's in this form. And the more you're able to see that person as an enlightened being, the the better you're able to recognize your own capacity. And so, from a Buddhist point of view, from an ultimate view, you're able to pin your burdens to this transcendental Christ figure. um, is a beautiful way expression that you have, that your mind, you are an expression of Christ itself, and you have that capacity to liberate and self-liberate no matter what comes. You have the capacity to hold it all and to digest it all. And you can choose to to stay attached to it and hold on to it and you know run yourself amok with that, but you can also hand it over. if that's skillful, or realize it was empty from the very beginning and there was nothing sticky to it at all. That's like those are different layers, and not one is not those are just the same thing from different perspectives. It's not that one is higher or better. It's just kind of different preferences. And depending on your karma, depending on your predispositions, you might have a propensity to like this, or this works better for you than that, and that's totally fine. Um, and yeah, it's an incredible practice that you know in Buddhism is seen. Like if you just do that practice, like for you, if you just listen to Christ music and you see that vision and you do that long enough, you might recognize yourself as everything was already Christ to the very beginning, and you've always been an embodiment of heaven on earth. And there's no duality between you, the teachings, your guru. And at one point, like you might be a lineage head. You might be someone who can receive all those projections without necessarily taking them on, and be that refuge for others. And then you got that light that and my teacher said, my teacher um, lit my butter lamp, and my role, my intent is to light your butter lamp so you can light for other people. And that's the only way I think where we can build community and build this recognition where, it wouldn't necessarily be perfect, where no conflict or no disagreements will ever happen. But when they do, there's a level of understanding and compassion and care that it wouldn't escalate to levels of violence that, we see sadly still see in the world today. And I think that intent, according to some Buddhist tradition, just having that intent, that recognition, that's enough. If you just remember that and recognize that in every moment, you you'll get there. It's inevitable. I think there's a lot of wisdom and beauty in that. So that's great. Like I didn't know you were so deep in on this path, and it's been a long time. I think we've chatted this deeply about things. So
Mm.
uh, it's I'm amazed and touched by the convergence I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah, there's an amazing overlap. It's really beautiful to talk to you, my
Mhm.
friend. And yeah, I would say that Christ is omnipresent and Christ is in whom we live, move, and have our being, And I feel though that yeah, Christ is one word that can be used for that all present
Mhm.
Buddha field or field of luminous light, inmost heart of grace, whatever that is. That's at
Mhm.
least the experiential feeling that I have when I feel most kind of open to this or most in touch with
Right.
this wholeness. And in that sense, I am I want to ask you, in a sense, would you say that this now and all that there is ultimately only the unfabricated? Because if you create a dichotomy or duality of
Mhm.
fabricated, unfabricated, that is just another duality that needs to fall away, right? Revealing the pure real, the real as all there is.
Mhm. Yeah, this has been a debate for over 1,000 years, and the way I hold it, it's a I'm holding a non-duality that doesn't make an opposition between duality and non-duality. Meaning, like non-duality contains a duality, uh, uh, which helps us move through the world and make decisions um, and not basically be lost in the ocean of one taste. Um, but it's very nuanced, and I think it depends a lot on how you're holding it. because I think it could be another duality that you feel like everything needs to be non-dual, so I cannot make any difference whatsoever. And I don't intuitively feel that's correct. Um, and if my understanding is correct, which I wouldn't profuse to say it is, um, it's in the end everything remains the same, but looked at from a very different view. And in the sense that it becomes another one of those important questions on the path, but the more it becomes an embodied living, the question doesn't really become that important anymore. Like once you've recognized the deep, ever omnipresent presence of this pure goodness and care, um, whether it is or it isn't, doesn't doesn't matter much. Like it doesn't make a difference. Um, and and that's what at least what I'm noticing is I'm gravitating towards teachers that seem to embody that. They don't really care about discussions or they don't really talk about that. All they do is try and help you recognize your own nature in all moments. And then, you don't need a teacher anymore per se. You don't need lineage anymore. Like like it's not dependent on any form and any particularity, any condition. It's ever, you know, everywhere, all the time, no matter what. And and then the question becomes, can I live from that place? And that becomes the nitty-gritty work of, you know, actually looking at every moment of your life. Like, can you remain in that indestructible wakefulness throughout all the tendencies to avoid or distract or extract or close down or and and that becomes like the beautiful playfulness of the practice.
Yeah, much easier said than done, but beautifully said. Indestructible wakefulness. I like that phrase. And yeah, for me, the way that piece shows up around like everything being real, I mean, really, like we've discussed in this conversation, words, concepts, definitions fall away, and you're just left with this as it is right in front of you. And like you say, that can include experiences of feeling a sense of being human and a sense of, I like this body is here and I'm here in a sense and I'm hugging you. And I would say that's also fully that's also fully this light shining forth as that, you know, appearance in that moment. And if there is some kind of conceptual overlay or that's partially infused in there, that's also made of the light. That's
Hmm.
also made of the Buddha
Right.
nature. It's made of this pure energy. And so yeah, it's kind of like you just more and more feel the what everything's made of in a sense. It's like you start to learn how to rest as what it's made of. And
Hmm.
yeah, and like you say, the the pinning it down becomes less and less relevant, but it is still interesting to have these conversations
Yeah.
and yeah, explore
Mhm.
different ways of speaking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like finding the right language for other people to recognize it and kind of or be interested in it and be on their path, whatever. If they're interested in it, not everybody has to, obviously, but it becomes like a question of skillfulness. But from a fundamental level, even duality is liberated in its own place, and that's beautiful, and it points to the absolute, but it doesn't capture it, and um and and the question is for me, the litmus test is, does it lead to this sense of this release of suffering, the release of contraction? Does it point or allow me to rest into this spaciousness that doesn't, uh, you know, almost like pathologically, compulsively trying to arrange things constantly, either symbolically inflating or deflating symbolically or materially in a way that I got mine and I'm comfortable and not seeing how it impacts others. And I found over time that becomes less and less and less, and I can be much more generous and and that generosity allows people like, wait a minute, I don't need to be so contracted either, and they can recognize the spaciousness, and that's the lamp you're able to transmit, and that's the work that I am committed to and devoted to, because I found the more I can do that for myself, the step by step, the more space I can give to others, and the more I don't have to I can refuse to participate in reifying the suffering, which helps sometimes to um, these moments of liberation. And I can let people be who they are without necessarily, um, be having to have the right story or getting what I feel like is righteously mine or whatever. And and that's kind of the non-extractiveness of this practice, or the demand for integrity that I think is um, it's really amazing. Uh, and for me, it's been that's where lineage really comes into play. Like having teachers who, they don't have to be perfect. This is what I thought when I was younger. Like I needed them to be perfect. But that was just a way for me to not having to actually engage. And now it's become like, if they can help me and they're embodying it in a way that I can see the potential of this path, that's enough. That's so incredibly precious. And I think that's the function of teachers. And then retroactively, or not retroactively, but if you proactively think about, wait a minute, if they transmit that to me, then I can transmit that to others. And that's fundamentally the bodhisattva path, where um, awakening doesn't happen as an individual, but it happens as a collective, where the human and the non-human, all factors come together as this awakened play, and participating full-heartedly in that, in the full spectrum living, as you mentioned, um, that becomes like the life's um, tremendous invitation and adventure. And I think that is, it's kind of, for me, it's like the antithesis to the hypnotizing consumerism and extractivism that's happening, and it's kind of like this. If you look at the last 150 years, there's been this crazy explosion that's like, it's like run on hydrocarbon fuel that's not sustainable, and it's forgotten something. It's forgotten, and it's very clear to all the peoples who have been exploited and conquered and colonized, that have those wisdom traditions or had those wisdom traditions. It's like, we don't know what white man is looking for. They're always looking, they're incessantly, feverishly trying to get something. And you look at Wall Street or Silicon Valley, and I've run a startup with crazy amounts, and I know that drive. I know um, that trying to fill that inner lack, to prop oneself up, that conceit, what Buddhism calls like this, trying to fulfill oneself by becoming a slave to dependencies of external form. That doesn't seem it's not sustainable. It doesn't seem to lead to everlasting happiness. It doesn't lead to integrity. It leads to, you know, basically the overlap of what Christianity talks about, all the vices. It's like the fundamental delusion in Buddhism, or the three poisons. It's like, and at this point, like if you put that in your mind stream, you get poisoned, and it's clear, and everything around you get poisoned, and it's like we've poisoned the earth enough, I think, and it's not going to end well. It's already not ending well, and so many species have died out, and so many peoples and languages have disappeared, and there's like little pockets left, and it's only speeding up. And so the only solution is to kind of drop out of that wall, that will, I think, fabricated, unreal world. And for me, taking refuge in wisdom tradition, in lineage, in teachers, can and in sanghas and in communities. That's the only way to remain resilient in, I think, the unfolding of conflict that's gonna happen, and this is already happening. So it's not just an individual, like, I'm gonna have awakened experiences. No, it's like, how can you be useful in community, be dependable, being a good person that um, is able to honor and recognize the conditions that allow life to exist to begin with, and give back through reciprocity, through um, modeling a level of maturity that is something that, was deeply missed when I grew up, and I think creates a lot of confusion because we don't really have clear models, or the models are not very valued. And so you get these weird, really strange, obscene excesses of culture that have no good ending. They lead to self-destruction consistently, and it's theoretically it seems unavoidable, or sorry, it feels avoidable. But from a samsaric kind of fundamental original sin or fundamental samsara perspective, maybe it's not avoidable, and it's just for the very few who recognize that there's a way out. And fundamentally, there was never a problem to begin with, and that's the fundamental liberation. So um, that's what I believe is now the most important way to orient myself as a North Star.
Hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. I love how you've continued to bring the conversation back down to the ground of that earthly level of orienting in our civilization ethically
Mhm.
and skillfully. And I'm gonna have to let you go in a moment, my friend. I wonder, is there any final word, if you were to share any final message with listeners, is there any
Mm,
final wisdom or life lesson that you'd like to share?
mm. What comes up for me right now is, I think, what we both alluded to in this conversation, that everyone who is listening to this, and everyone who is not listening to this, like, you matter. And it's impossible to actually perceive and recognize the importance of you playing out in this world system. And and so my wish is for anyone to recognize the beauty of their soul, their being, and through that find this level of ease and spaciousness and care and beauty and love, um, that's available to all of us at any moment. It's our it's our um, birthright, if you will. And and even if you don't experience that or you don't believe that's possible, that's okay too. And I would kindly invite to question that and see what will be a next step for you, what will be a path for you. Because I think as the world unfolds in the way it's going, we need resilience and we need kindness and beauty, and every little act matters tremendously. It matters to the person receiving that or the being receiving that. And like that capacity is almost infinite the more we realize the yeah, our fundamental nature. We've already always been this infinite being, and there's nothing that we cannot give, and our capacity to support one another is infinite and can grow word by word, insight by insight, practice by practice. So life is tremendously precious, and find a path, find a teacher, find a group, find a friend who who sees that in you and supports you in that and empowers you to be that way. I think that is such a gift to receive and to give to others. And so thank you, Jordan, for doing that work yourself. I'm in, I'm tremendously impressed by how you've grown over the years that I've known you, and it's very deeply inspirational. I'm very glad people like you exist that care so much and have the intelligence and the courage to explore these realms that are deeply uncomfortable and confrontational, and yet at the same time, you know, finding that confidence of wow, this is the path. Like I can see it in my relationship with my daughter, with my wife, with with my uh, all the people that depend on you and look to you for support. Um, like that's why we do the work, and and you showing that it's possible, you know, shows other people it's possible, and that I think perhaps tips the balance just enough. You know, I'm very much of a Tolkien guy in that sense, where it's the tiny moments of kindness that can hold evil at bay, and I found that true in my life, and I hope that's true. I mean, I hope more people can live that way because sure as hell, the world seems to need it more and more.
Hmm. Beautifully said, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'm just about finished reading the trilogy in recent weeks, actually. So it's interesting you
Awesome.
brought up Tolkien. It's been an amazing experience. It's really amazing. Yeah, yeah,
First time you're
everybody.
reading it?
Yeah, first time reading the whole trilogy. I had read
Wow,
The
that's
Hobbit
great.
years ago. Yeah, it's incredible. Is there any, if people wanted to find out more about your work, where should they look? If
Mhm. Yeah, so I spent the last almost 2 years now. Like for those who don't know, I've been in the psychedelic field for almost a decade, and I feel like I've gone through like different cycles, and I've come to pretty firm resolution that for the space's maturity, it needs to be rooted in wisdom traditions, and the one I'm most familiar and comfortable with is Buddhism. And so I've been developing like what would be the right, like if you wanted to work with psychedelics and you think that would be a skillful way of opening oneself up to these insights, um, what would be the proper preparation for that? Like what would be the contemplative skill set that you need to develop? What would be the ethical kind of way of relating to oneself and others, and what would be the helpful ways of not getting philosophically kind of stuck in forms of, ideology that can be destructive or ego inflation. And yeah, so I developed a 12-month program called A Path Between Worlds that kind of tries to synthesize um, the some of the key insights and contemplative skills of Buddhism with the skillful means of psychedelic sacraments. And people can find that might be hard to spell, but maybe you can link people to it. It's called upayosis, and upaya stands for skill and means, meaning um, the provisional contingent practices that help you realize your fundamental nature. And um, I think psychedelics used skillfully can be one of many ways of recognizing that. And I think there are so many conceptual overlays that, at least for me, when I grew up in the West, there were layers upon layers. And what psychedelics can do, I think, can give you a glimpse like how deep that can go, and that can allow you then to unpack that. Not big experiences are not the goal, but they can deliver this level of insight that I think um, can 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 speed things up and accelerate. Not that speeding up is the point, but at the same time, there's a lot of unnecessary suffering that can be helped by the right medicine. And I think the medicine is conditional, and it's conditional upon the work you do and the courage and honesty you develop through these practices, but also dependent on the community you're involved with and the teachers you engage with. And so um, all my main teachers said yes to participate in the program, which is awesome. These are all lineage holders who have practiced or have a personal practice of Buddhism and psychedelics for over more than decades. And some of the top research in the field. Like one of my backgrounds is in interdisciplinary science, and there's a really amazing convergence happening um, in both the research of meditation, the research of psychedelics, and the interpretation through the lens of Buddhism. So, upayosis.com. You spell it Upayyosis, and I'm sure Jordan will link to it. So have a look if this feels resonant. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, beautiful. Definitely will link to it. And yeah, thank you again so much, Martijn. Really good to see you and connect again today, brother. And
Likewise, friends.
just wishing you all the best. Take good care in everything and be
Thank you so
well.
much for the opportunity. I really appreciate you and this moment together. Thank you.
You're welcome.